Hey everyone, this is part 2 of my favorite Filipino films of all time. If you want to check out part 1, I talked about the 1950s to the 1980s, so if you like old school films, check that one out. But today, we are talking about the newer age of Philippine cinema. So let's start with the 90s, and Hihintayin Kita sa Langit. This is the movie that honestly taught me that it was okay to be a moreno. When I was a kid, I was very insecure about my darker skin, and my mom always told me to look at this movie so I can see Richard Gomez in all his poggy glory. He was tall, dark, and handsome, and it honestly convinced me that brown is beautiful. But that's not the only reason why you should watch this movie. It's honestly so beautifully shot, especially the start, because they're in the province and they're kids, so how can you not fall in love when you're riding on horses and you see beaches, mountains, and all this beautiful scenery? And it's not just a feast for the eyes, because this movie is also a treat for your ears. The music, the score by Ryan Cayabyab is honestly an eargasm. I don't know how else I can describe it. My other pick from the 90s would be Radio Romance. This is kinda like a Filipino 90s version of Love Actually, where you have different stories about different relationships tied together, with the most popular being the story of Claudine and Rico Yan. In this movie, they play these Lasalista students. And I'd say that even now, it's a pretty accurate portrayal of college love. Maybe I am a little bit biased because I'm a radio DJ, and this movie is called Radio Romance. But this movie is tied together so perfectly by a radio DJ, acting as a narrator, and the voice is just so soothing and beautiful. This is honestly my least favorite era. Dito kasi ako pinanganak, kaya wala akong masyadong maalala. So you guys might know more than me. Comment below kung may recommendations kayo, I'd love to check them out. But during this time, sobrang hirap kumita ang mga pelikula. From 1990 to 2009, napakalaki ang amusement tax. I guess because sobrang laki din ng utang ng Pilipinas, kaya kailangan natin maghanap ng pera. Kailangan 3 times ng budget ang box office gross para kumita ang pelikula at kaya nag-suffer ang movies natin. And with that, let's move on to the new millennium. With my first recommendation, Bayaning Third World. This came out right after the Jose Rizal movie in the late 90s, so the Jose Rizal hype was pretty real. So they made a mockumentary about our national hero, where they interviewed his siblings, his lovers, and we got to learn about Jose Rizal in a very interesting way. I would also recommend Dekada, based on Ulhati Bautista's Palanca Award-winning novel. It's about this middle-class family living through the Marcos presidency and his eventual dictatorship. It's a fictional story, but you get to see real-life events through the eyes of this family, like Filipino involvement in the Vietnam War, Filipino students getting more radicalized, and the Bataan nuclear power plant. I would highly recommend you read the book, but if you can't, the movie is pretty good too. So with that, let's move on to the 2010s, when we were finally free from the shackles of the amusement tax. At dahil doon, umusbong ang mga indie movies, with the best example of that being that thing called Tadhana. Basically just a very long conversation between two people, but at the same time telling a tale of love, loss, and longing with beautiful shots of Baguio and Dekada along the way. The most prominent studio at this time being TBA, and the place where I learned how to talk about movies. They produced I'm Drunk, I Love You, which I think caused the La Union boom of the mid-2010s. This is the ultimate friendzone movie, and you see this sa character ni Maka, and the lengths that she went through just for Paolo Avellino's character. At lahat tayo nakaka-relate dito. But you can't talk about this movie without mentioning the amazing soundtrack. I mean, what's a road trip without Burnout by 3D, right? Moving on to probably the most successful TBA movies. Heneral and Goyo. Movies you've probably already seen. But if you haven't, what are you doing? Go watch these movies. Not just for the epic battle sequences, but because it's impossible not to feel nationalistic after watching these films. I don't think it's a coincidence that after this movie came out, the 5 peso coin switched from Aguinaldo to Bonifacio. And the cast does such a good job. John Arcilla is Heneral Luna to the point that every movie after this, it felt like he was still Heneral Luna. Well, until a certain movie that we'll talk about later. But Leo Martinez, Mon Confiado, Epi Quizon, they all bring their A-game here, so please check this out if you haven't already. Another film I loved during this decade was Respeto, which might seem like a Filipino 8 Mile, but it's so much more than that. We talked about films that tackled martial law, and we'll talk about films that tackle Duterte later, but this is a movie that tackles both at the same time. It starts off with a rap battle, and because it's a rap battle, parang flip-top siya na sobrang daming misogyny, palakihan ng mga tite, at sobrang bastos. But it sets the tone for this Duterte world. A world kung saan yung mga mahirap kailangan magbenta ng droga para mabuhay. At mga corrupt na pulis na kumikita dahil sa mga taong ito. We meet Hendrix, played by Abra, who's an aspiring rapper who just wants respect. And we also meet Doc, a bookstore owner who was a poet during martial law. He used his poetry to speak out about injustice, and he was punished for doing so. Doc becomes a mentor to Hendrix, and because of their interactions, we see the similarities between these two eras. This movie gets a lot of hate for being overly misogynistic, and there is a certain scene that people felt like it was too much, but I think the movie overall, and especially the last scene, is a very powerful message about the world at the time. But you can't really talk about 2010 cinema without mentioning Eric Mati, and the first film people have in mind is On the Job, a movie about people in jail who are temporarily released to become hitmen, surprisingly inspired by true events, if we believe the driver who told Eric about his jail hitman situation. Joel Torre and Gerald Anderson are awesome as the hitman, and you really feel their chemistry, the veteran showing the ropes to the young guy. And it's very interesting to see these two characters outside of jail, as they try to live normal lives. Kunwari raw sa abroad sila nagtatrabaho. And they go against Piolo Pascual, this cop who just wants to do the right thing. They keep changing your allegiance. Do you want the cops to win or the gunmen to win? A lot of people say this movie is overrated, but I think it lives up to the hype. But maybe you can check out the movie and decide for yourself. However, I think the best Eric Mati movie is Honor Thy Father. If Himala was about people turning to religion because of poverty, this movie is about religion exploiting the rich. John Lloyd Cruz finds himself in the middle of this cult where people are encouraged to donate and donate and donate. And pretty early on, we see that he doesn't buy into the cult. And here we see Eric Mati's best direction. There are scenes with fanatics all around him singing and believing while his face is straight. But the cult stuff takes a backseat as they find themselves in financial problems, and he turns to his siblings to help him get out. There are honestly so many good things to love about this movie. Michiko Yamamoto's screenplay has so much heart, John Lloyd Cruz proves that he's more than just a rom-com guy, and Tirso Cruz shines as the cult leader. You just buy into the nonsense that he speaks about. And of course, Khalil Ramos steals every scene that he's in. And if you could only watch one Eric Mati movie, I think this should be it. Whew. Are you guys still there? It's time for the last era. It's time for the 2020s, the pandemic era of filmmaking. And let's start things off with Fangirl, the best film of the pandemic MMFF, where both Paolo Avellino and Directonet shattered all expectations. Both are known for rom-coms but prove that there's so much more than that. In this movie, Directonet showed the dangers of idol culture in the Philippines. That the perception of these artistas is very different from who they are in real life. And the movie also talks about the dangers of turning someone into an idol, but in the political sense, as you can see Duterte posters and imagery all over the movie. Charlie Dizon's performance as the fangirl was amazing as well. She was crazy, obsessive, but believable at the same time. The cinematography was also spectacular, showing you how she sees things versus how Paolo Avellino sees things. Now from the MMFF, let's move on to the Venice Film Festival, where On the Job 2 was in competition for Best Film, and where John Arcilla won Volpe Cup for Best Actor. And it's very easy to see why. This was honestly the first movie where I didn't see him as Heneral Luna. I saw him as Sisoy, a radio DJ paid to spit out propaganda, where he clashes with his best friend Arnel, played by Christopher De Leon, who advocates for the truth. And their chemistry is so good. It's honestly so amazing to watch the clash between these two titans of Philippine cinema. The soundtrack is also amazing. Jonoy Danao's Filipino version of Bella Ciao gives me chills every time, as well as the haunting cover of Asin's Balita. Somehow this film took a movie about hitmen and turned it into a sequel about fake news and media manipulation. Very relevant in today's times. Now let's talk animated. Hayop Ka, the Nimfa Dimaano story. I never thought I would live to see an R-rated animated Filipino movie, but here we are. It's a movie that's relatable without trying too hard. It's a simple story, nothing really mind-blowing, but the animation really stands out. It's so cool to see what an animated Metro Manila looks like, and hopefully if I make another list in 10 years, we'll have more animated movies. And finally, we have Rabid, which is the Shake, Rattle, and Roll of 2021. This movie has 4 different stories. May mga mangkukulam, may mga zombie, at may supernatural kare-kare. But all these stories encapsulate the feelings of COVID. Not necessarily getting sick, pero yung feeling na nakakulong sa bahay. Yung feeling ng isolation. And if cinema is a reflection of the world around us, I think that one day, sana, kung wala ng COVID, at gusto mong ipakita sa anak mo kung ano yung buhay nung panahon na to, this is the movie you should show them. So those are my favorite Filipino films of all time. Hopefully, you can check out some of these movies, and if you have a friend who thinks na basura ang Philippine cinema, please recommend them something from here. Sayang naman kung akala ng kaibigan mo, puro exorcist lang tayo rito. But if there are films you think I missed, please comment them down below. I would love to check them out. And if you want an in-depth review of a certain movie or era, maybe the 80s, let me know. Some of these movies I already reviewed, so you can check them out in the description. And of course, special shout out to our Mother Lily channel member, Ashley Martelino. If you want to do the same and you want to join the channel, just click the join button down below. But till next time, peace and I love y'all.
Hoy mga Pinoy, ito na ang medisina, nagbabagong apoy, linagyan ng gasolina, kaya't tinatanong pa ba kung kanino at sino ang tiyak na puntahan sa kulturang Pilipino? Ako na ang sagot, ang dakilang gamot.